And ready, set, go. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today. And thank you so much to our special guest for today, Sam Ladner. So I'll look forward with Sam. You can give yourself a quick introduction.
Sure. How's my sound? Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Fantastic.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Ladner. I'm a sociologist by training. Some of you may have read some of my stuff that I wrote, a couple books on ethnography and mixed methods. And I am a principal researcher at Workday in the California Bay Area. Also Canadian, FYI.
Awesome. Nice.
Oh, I did not know that.
You didn't know that?
No, I did not know that. Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense.
What does that mean?
The energy is very Canadian. It's very warm, very welcoming.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll stop the Q&A. Or should I say first, welcome back to Learners Wrapped. This is our weekly podcast where we're going to go over everything that we've done this week on the Learners Community platform. So today we have Sam Ladner with us, and I guess we'll just hop right into a Q&A with Sam in regards to her talk from UXRConf 2018, I believe. Am I incorrect?
Was it 2018? Yeah, I think it was 2018. Yeah.
2018.
Okay.
I can actually read out. I'm just going to quickly read out the details that we included for people who tuned into Sam's talk. So the title was The Tension Between A/B Testing and Ethnographic and Generative Research. And this was, throwback week to our UXRConf 2018 and 2019. And Sam was just talking about, when does A/B testing work? When does it not? And why are we so drawn to it, even though we know it might not be the best solution? So that was the gist of Sam's talk.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to take away the Q&A portion?
Yeah, sure thing. So I just want to start by saying I think that your talk very much so summarized something that a lot of researchers toy with, a lot of researchers who work in industry toy with in terms of thinking about student ethnography and A/B testing, weighing the pros and cons of both. And the allusion to big science and generative research, I think, speaks to a massive point of inspiration for curious minds who work in research. So the first question we have here today is, your conference talk was on the tension between A/B testing and ethnographic and generative research. What new thoughts have you gained about this topic since then? What's your current point of view?
Oh, that's interesting. I would say it's probably not changed fundamentally. In fact, if anything, I've been much more confident that basic science is important for every context. You need to know the basic properties of a thing before you can start really meaningfully A/B testing your way to thoughtful and good interventions. COVID has kind of brought that to the fore in many ways. It's so funny how people have been complaining. They were complaining like, when are we going to get a vaccine? And, why don't they know what our guidance should be? And, how far away can we stand? And I think it kind of peeled the curtain back on what basic science really is and how long it takes. People, I think, now have a popular understanding that you can't just randomly start shooting interventions into the dark and expect really meaningful results. It takes time, and you need to wrap your arms around a project and a topic area. You need to collect basic data. So if anything, I would say it's like deepened.
That's very interesting. Now that you brought it up too, it really makes you think about how going back to basic science and trying to understand the core principles of whatever it is that you're trying to understand, that's very much so in line with like the foundations of science and the foundations of human-centered design. And it's very interesting how a lot of the time we try to gravitate away from the foundations, especially when working in industry, and do things that go against like the fundamentals of the art form. But it always takes like that massive wake up call to get us back to, oh, this is actually what we're supposed to be doing.
Right. Yeah. It's funny. I don't know why that happens so often. Oh, well, we can just, can't we just like, we can go faster, or we can do this and we can skip this part. I saw this really terrible movie on Netflix a while ago, starring Cate Blanchett. I was it on Netflix? I don't remember. It was this movie, and she played this architect that lived in Seattle, which is why we watched it, because we were doing like, let's watch everything in Toronto, and let's watch everything in Seattle, and let's watch everything in, you know, and she lived in this neighborhood that we used to live in Seattle, except for it was totally weird and not at all realistic. She was this architect, right? And she'd had this creative like block for like 20 years. And then the story is that she got this great source of inspiration, and she built this new station in Antarctica, like a science station for the scientists. And it was like visionary and all this stuff. And her process was really interesting because she always insisted on, it was like kind of a character building thing. It's like, well, she would ask people like, well, how many women are there, and how many men are there, and how many bathrooms are there, and what time do people get up, and what time do they go to bed, and what do they like to eat, and people were portraying this in the beginning as like her weird, like unnecessary, undirected, information seeking as a designer architect. She was like off the mark. But then of course, at the end, when you see the results of this science station, all of those questions mattered, right? So she designed stairways in particular ways, and she put bathrooms in particular ways, and the kitchen looked a certain way, and all this kind of stuff, right? It's funny that we still laud that kind of behavior only after you've produced this brilliance. And we don't have enough stories about people doing that kind of stuff. And then it leads nowhere at first, right? It leads nowhere at first, but eventually that information, you keep that information, how many women and how many men, and how many bathrooms, and maybe the first project that you worked on doesn't need that information, but eventually you come up with another project on it, and that information comes in handy. We forget that. Like, we forget that we already know that stuff. It's not like we're flying blind all the time. We act like we are, but we're not. So really successful industry applications of research, I think, are based on a really firm foundation of that kind of thing. And we don't talk about it as much. We talk about the fancy one-shot deal. I got this amazing insight one time, and it led to everything. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up to that, I think it's like, especially in startups, because your mindset is so like moving fast, and you forget that you sort of like, maybe it hasn't been proliferated among everyone as it should have been because you've been moving so fast, but there is someone in the company who has a lot of knowledge on maybe past research done with users, or like Kyle, you have a lot of knowledge of generative research done in the past that I might not know about. So yeah, it's just a good reminder to think about these things, and maybe you don't always have to go back to that A/B testing. Yeah,
it's true what you say about startups in particular. It's part of it is a really fine balance, because you don't want to lose that spirit of, forward motion, and you don't want to lose that momentum and that enthusiasm, and you might even call it naivete. You don't want to lose that because that's a really important source of energy. But we know the most successful startups are usually run by people around 40 who've had many failures already. Those are the startups that stick. It's not the one at, you're 26 and you didn't have time to do research, so you built an app and it was super successful. That's actually not the startup story. A lot of us think it is. So go ahead and do that kind of stuff. Like, go ahead, 26, build an app, make it fail. Do that maybe 1-2 more times. By the time you have gathered enough insight and remember it all and know it all, how many men, how many women, how many bathrooms, what food, all that information, you bring that to bear the next time. And you may not realize it, may not talk about it, but so don't lose the enthusiasm. By all means do it, but recognize it's a long arc, you know?
Process.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we forget process.
It's easy. Nobody likes the word process. There's a difference between like
Crazy. I mean.
growth and scale, right?
Mhm.
Like growth is just crazy, anarchic, like change at all costs, you know, more is better. Scaling is different. Scaling is not bureaucracy, you know, like, oh, it's so processy. Why are you making us do these strict methods? You know, it's like, no, this is scaling it for the future. I'm investing. If we're going to grow, we need to scale our procedures. We need them to be like, I have to be sure that you could pick up where I left off without me being here. That's really hard to do. And a lot of people go, oh, don't give me bureaucracy. I hate it. You know, and it's like, well, that's not what this is. This is about scale. Big scale requires procedure, unfortunately. Or maybe
Very
fortunately. I don't know.
That reminds me of a quote that I read somewhere. You know you've built a good system if you can hand it over to someone you don't trust and it still runs the same way.
That's a great quote. Yeah, totally. Someone you don't trust.
It was in relation to like government. Like if you build a really great system, you're a Democrat, and then Republicans are in power afterwards, it should still be able to run, even though they're people that you don't necessarily like or trust.
Right. That makes sense. I can see that. It's got the checks and balances built in. It's got all the support and infrastructure it needs. It's resilient. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. It's very interesting too, because it's almost as if we have that system in place, and but we choose to go for shortcuts, even though we have this tried and tested way of doing things. But we're all constantly looking for shortcuts. We constantly think that if we cut out steps, then that's going to lead to an increase in efficiency. We're going to be able to move more rapidly. But in reality, I think a lot of times it forces us to end up going backwards and retracking and figuring out where we went wrong. But really, we know where we went wrong. We went wrong when we started skipping steps.
Oh, no. This time I've beat the system. This time I figured it out. Right? Yeah. I can always skip steps. No, of course not. Of course not. But I mean, it's if you know that about yourself as a human being, that you're going to be tempted to do that, you can actually even trick yourself a little bit, right? Ahead of time. And if you're really going to be a leader about it, you can trick everybody else, knowing full well that they want the easy path. They want to skip the steps. So you trick them into thinking that they are getting the easy path and they are skipping steps. But in reality, they're not skipping anything. I like doing that.
Just the subtle nudges so people do the right thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And you feel so like secret agenty, you know, like you're setting little like traps for people, like please walk into this trap of, you know, doing the right thing for yourself and for, you know, whatever we're trying to do here. You set the little traps and they walk into it and they're like, you know, we should really spend more time figuring out what the value proposition is. And you're like, yes, I did it again. Yeah.
How do you usually set traps for people so they end up following the process properly, understanding the value of generative research and basic science? Like, how do you set those traps in an organization?
That's a really good question. And the trap setting lexicon is funny. My colleague at Workday, Chris Geeson, he actually he described me as doing that. And I had never thought about it before. And I was like, because he'll be sitting there and he'll be like, oh, watch this. And I was like, oh, that's true. I kind of do that. I think it's kind of, I rely a little bit on my past teaching experience a lot in that. If anybody has taught even, you know, anybody above the age of even 8, you'll see, like, not much less adults, right? You'll see that people will not come to a conclusion that you just tell them, right? You just don't tell them a conclusion. They have to figure it out themselves, right? So setting the trap is kind of like a Socratic method where you ask them questions and you're like, isn't that curious that we don't know the answer to how many bathrooms we need? And they'll be like, you're right. That's crazy. How do we not know this? And you're like, maybe if only there were a way that we could find this out. That is basically the principle, is asking them questions that you know full well the answer to. And all you're trying to do is elicit in their minds the questioning that you've already come through and out the other side of, right? So understanding that you have to do this white glove kind of service from time to time, you have to kind of guide people through those questions. You have to have the relationship in place already, which is such heavy lifting, and it takes so long. And frankly, some of us just are not up for that all the time. Like I wouldn't say I'm an introvert, but I'm not as extroverted as people think I am. So for me to constantly go out and like talk with people and make friends with people and earn trust, and it is exhausting. And nobody told me that I had to do that. All they told me I had to do was be an excellent researcher. And then I figured out, wow, that's just like the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. But once you get there, right? Once you have the relationships, you can ask these questions and you can like plant seeds in people's minds. And it's very satisfying to see them asking the questions that you want them to ask. And it's even more satisfying like later, further, when you see them, they look at you and they go, wait a minute, did you intend this? You planned this, you know? You're like, yep, totally did. Took you a while, but yeah, welcome.
It's interesting that you say that you didn't expect that you needed to like build relationships and be good with people, be a good researcher, but it's interesting. I think those are key components of doing ethnography, especially with groups that are different than you, building trust.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just in a scientific capacity, you want them to do what you don't want them to. You want them to like have agency and be candid with you. But in a professional capacity, you're using that trust to get them to think that, oh, this is my idea, but really it's your idea.
You know, that's an interesting contrast. I was actually talking a little bit about this last night. I was at a party last night.
Oh,
yeah. So it was wonderful.
It's been a long time since I've seen one of those.
Yeah, we were all confused. Like, what do we do? You know, how does this work? And we were talking, I mentioned that I was going to bring my camera. Mm-hmm. And I decided against it. And what I realized, the reason I was going to bring my camera is because I really just wanted to hide behind the camera. I wanted to be the documenter, right? I wanted to disappear and like see, you know, on behalf of other people, I wanted to see. And that's a little bit what I do as an ethnographer. I actually disappear. I'm not a member of that group. I'm not seeking a friendship. I'm taking care, and I'm accompanying those people. Like I'm accompanying them. You know, I'm taking their side. I'm standing next to them and I'm watching what they're watching. But that's very different than when you're got stakeholders in an organization. I'm not accompanying them. I'm doing more than that. Like I'm working with them. I might even be dragging them, you know? Mm-hmm. So I find that a little more challenging, to be honest, because you have the dynamics of play are much more complex. I can't just disappear. I have to be there and I have to have an opinion, and they're expecting me to have an opinion, and they're expecting me to, you know, work within the confines of the organization, and they're expecting all this stuff. And it's more challenging, I find. As an ethnographer, it's kind of fun because you can go in and you can observe and you can spend time and you can hang out and you can tell stories, other people's stories. But you're nothing, you disappear. It flows through you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So very interesting look at the two sides of the coin. Both require like similar skill sets, but very different execution.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to what you just said. I love disappearing as well. You just like fade into the background and observe. I don't mind being in the spotlight or having to be in a position where like you have to have an opinion. But I definitely prefer the former over the latter.
Isn't it interesting? Because I think it's something that most people don't realize about qualitative researchers in general. They have this seemingly like soft touch. They can build rapport quickly. They get people to talk. I have to honestly turn that off in like quote unquote real life. Like my husband will notice this. He's like, "You're interviewing again." because if I'm talking to somebody and it just turns on, I just like, oh, tell me about that, blah blah blah, and he's like, that wasn't a real conversation you just had. I was like, you're right. I did not have a real conversation. I just let them talk and I pulled stuff out. And the thing is, that's really weird about that especially in the organizational context, when you do that kind of work, it feels good for people. They like it. They like telling their story. They like someone focused on them. They like to have, somebody asking deep questions and actively listening. It feels good. But you probably shouldn't do it all the time, because you still have an agenda that you're trying to move forward. You still have opinions that people probably need to know about. So it's actually something I fight. I'll just turn into interviewer, and people are like, wow, that was a really good conversation. And I was like, I think to myself, well, I don't think it was, because I turned that on. I shouldn't have done it. You don't know anything about me. You didn't ask anything about me. I know everything about you. You told me everything. And I feel bad now. I probably should have been a little bit more forthcoming. It's easy to hide, right? You can just hide behind that, and people don't know.
Yeah.
I hope no one in my personal life listens to what you say right now, because I do that to everyone I know.
Aha. Yeah. Well, I hope they all hear and they keep you in check.
That is very interesting to think about the duality of being a researcher, because I think by nature, we're all people who would prefer just to listen and ask questions and be flies on the wall. But to operate within an organization and like get things done, you have to take on a different persona. And
you do.
It's a skill set that none of us are necessarily in love with. Like, it's not part of the job that I think most of us like, but it's a necessary, I hate the word evil, but I guess you have to say necessary evil for like the sake of the discipline.
For the sake of the discipline, you're absolutely right. You have to learn how to, I think a lot of people talk about this. I don't know about you guys, but how researchers need to like get a seat at the table and need to be more like heard at the leadership level. And I've had a lot of people say to me, like non-researchers say to me, oh, there's something about researchers where they don't do that. Like they don't like leading, or they, sometimes even downright mean things like they lack courage, or they're gutless, or they don't speak up, and like almost like there's something like genetic or something about a researcher and I was like, no, you guys are completely misunderstanding what's going on. They have this highly honed craft of listening and observing and like synthesizing. But like being a pass-through, like they're just a vehicle. It's a vessel. I'm a vessel for somebody else. And that takes an enormous amount of work. That is not a powerlessness position. That's a highly honed skill. Likewise, though, the criticism is still important, because like I'm working on this project right now where I have to take a very strong leadership role. I have to like drag people, basically. And so I'm not doing that much in terms of primary research in this project, a little bit, but for the most part, I have to be setting the stage for other people to come to their own recognitions about what is working and what isn't working. Like I need them to understand that. So I have to spend a lot more time putting myself out there and like strongly putting myself out there. And I have to like dance this dance where it's like, I'm not telling you what to think. It would be so much easier if I could like, just think this, come on, just here you go. Here's the answer. Just do this, right? I can't do that because it doesn't really work. Like people have to come to their own conclusion. So I would say it is very challenging to play that role, but it is also what is required for the research discipline. Like people need to know, we can't just be vessels for everybody's other stories. They need to see how hard it is to pay attention to others. They need to see how hard it is to know what your users and customers really want, to be humble about the knowledge you have and to organize that knowledge and to be rigorous about how you organize it and collect it. Like people need to know that. They need to know how hard this job is. And so the way you put it, like for the discipline, that's exactly like we all have to dig deep for the discipline and show that this is an important thing. Like, you need to understand who these people are and what they want, and you need to speak authentically to them. So yeah, if there's a temptation to become a vessel and stay in the background, by all means use it when you need to, but you recognize that that's not going to be enough.
That is very true, to think about the fact that it's almost sacrificial to, I wouldn't say sacrificial, but it's almost what's the word? Well, it's a disservice to everyone else for researchers to choose to just be flies on the walls 24/7. It's a disservice to what you're trying to build, for you not to come into a room and take up your necessary space. But it's almost I feel as though, since so many people in the field are by nature empaths, it's very difficult for us to sit down and say, okay, how do I teach someone else how to empathize with me, when empathy is almost second nature to us?
Right, exactly. Well, like I said, it's finely honed, right? And you've got this skill, and you need to start looking at your own skills with somebody else's eyes, just like you do with everybody else that you research. You have to start looking at yourself with somebody else's eyes. And I mean, I guess that's probably the secret to all sorts of success, right? Being able to understand that. It's hard though. Like, it's like, wouldn't it be easier if we just never had to do that?
It would be. I feel like it wouldn't actually be easier. I think we would lose out on a lot of the value that we get from the process of going through it.
Well, that's true. You're right. But come on, some days you just want to put your feet up and eat corn chips,
Some days we all just want to take the shortcut, just like we were saying before.
Yeah, totally.
I have one last question for you, even though we didn't have many structured questions, but I think you had good conversation so far in this half hour. I think this is going to be useful for a lot of people as just a concrete piece of knowledge, but how do you approach conversation with someone who is overly set on A/B testing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, first of all, you have to know if that's the case, because they may not be. They may be doing it performatively and saying that because they think it's really the best thing, or it's what's expected. Or I actually find, as soon as you kind of scratch the surface a little bit, you find out that they're just saying it because, and they seem enthusiastic because they think that that's what they're performing for a researcher, and researchers do this, right? And they don't realize that that's maybe not necessarily always the case. So scratch the surface a little bit and find out if they really are dead set against it, or if they're just like performing it. And then once you decide, oh, no, they really want to do this, they have reasoned it through in their minds, asking them like exploratory questions and modeling or simulating the results for them is really useful. So a lot of people don't realize that most A/B tests are designed so badly that they don't give any direction. And the ones that are designed really well are really narrow, right? The ones that can't tell you exactly what to do are really, and that's deductive reasoning. That's normal, right? It's a tiny thing. Should we do this or that? And this and that are very, very small things, right? So simulating what they can and can't learn beforehand is really, really useful. And then choosing proactively, going to them with an A/B test proposal when they maybe haven't asked for it, but it's exactly the right moment. Like it's the exact right case to use it. Like I gave an example when I was at Amazon, I had a product manager who asked me, should we tweak the algorithm this way? Or should we keep it as it is? And I was like, this is exactly the right opportunity. So it wasn't a quote unquote A/B test per se. It was a survey, but it was I used a established scale on credibility and trust. And I split the survey participants, the respondents, into two, and this one, and I compared it, and I used, like, it was very straightforward, right? She couldn't believe how straightforward it was. She goes, is this it? Like, it was like one answer, like one line was the results. It took a lot to get the survey organized and fielded, and, but once I did the analysis, the answer was no. She's like, that's it? And I'm like, yep, that's it. Don't do anything. You don't have to. And she's like, really? Can I trust this? And I was like, yeah, look, like I just did the analysis for it. You want to go dive deep? We can dive deep, but it's clear. We changed one thing. I looked at the difference. It was negligible. Don't bother. And she's like, that's great. And I was like, that's what they need to have that. They need to have that experience. If they have that ahead of time, they're going to know the difference between, yes, no, go, no go questions. And like, actually, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know how many men and women, you don't know how many bathrooms, you don't know what they eat for dinner.
Educational approach. You need to actually teach them what is an A/B test. I didn't realize that many people didn't understand that an A/B test, you have to have like a controllable difference between the two different conditions. So it's easy to look at statistically, but
of course. Yeah. Well, and most people don't realize that A and B, the difference between A and B is tiny. It's one thing. It's not a whole other thing. It's not it's not like I'm comparing Chicago and Vancouver. What? No. You're comparing North Vancouver to West Van. Like that's what you're comparing. You're not comparing Chicago and Pittsburgh and Vancouver all at the same time. Oh, let's look at, they all have bridges. Let's take the bridge. Like, no, that's not how it works. They're completely different places. Unfortunately.
People have variances. A lot of people have variances.
Sorry for my dog in the background, but I do have one quick question. I just wanted your opinion, Sam, on what your thoughts are on the A/B testing around email subject lines.
Email subject lines?
Yeah.
What about it?
So like, just like the wording, the terminology around it is like you A/B test different email subject lines before you send it out. Maybe you send out like 6 versions of subject lines. This is like, I don't know, are we like calling it wrong or is there a better way?
It's not really an A/B test. An A/B test is going to be tiny. So the subject lines will be more or less the same except for one variance. Mm-hmm. So if they're very different, it's not an A/B test. Now it's still an experiment, but it's not an A/B test. There's the podcast Planet Money had an interesting episode just recently where they were talking about interventions that worked for getting vaccinated for flu shots, right? So there was a group that was doing this right at the beginning of the pandemic, knowing full well that we need to know what's going to get people vaccinated, even though no vaccine had even been invented yet. And so they did it through text messaging and different kinds of text messaging. It was not an A/B test. There was one version that was a joke, which turned out didn't work so well. There was another one that said that you have a vaccine reserved for you, which was the most successful. But these are radically different treatments. They didn't call them A/B tests, but they did call them experiments. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Folks, I hate to leave, but I got to run. I got another meeting.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you so much for staying time over with us. Hope you have a great rest of your day, Sam.
Thank you. Happy Friday, everybody.
Happy Friday.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Awesome. I'm actually going to quickly check up on my dog. She was freaking out for 1 second. I'll be right back.
Okay. Just Kyle here. To the 6 people that are watching, we're going to have a quick intermission, and I hope you enjoy our... oh, never mind, Ray's back. I was going to give you a quick intermission with our theme song.
Okay, yeah. I had to let her in my room. Remote working from home, your pets are going to freak out if someone like walks in front of your front door. She was barking for a full-on 10 straight minutes. Yeah.
That's okay. Just making sure you're safe.
Awesome. I don't think we fully went over sort of like the whole swath of events that we had this week. So I'm just going to give a quick breakdown of like, what happened on theirs. So we just wrapped up our Q&A with Sam. It's awesome. If you missed the Q&A, we are going to be uploading a recorded version of this to our UXR podcast, and it'll be linked up in a recap email that's going out later today, so stay tuned for that. But in terms of just like the events that happened this week, we had a ton of throwback to UXRConf 2018-2019 screenings. So we had about 10 talks being screened throughout the day this past week. The talks were screened twice, and yeah, they were very interesting. I would say they're still pretty relevant. I'm sure we've had some updated learning since then, but all the talks I find still include those gems, the same gems that they included last like 3 years ago and 2 years ago. And have you watched any of these talks in particular, Kyle? Did anything stand out for you in terms of learnings?
I was a very big fan of Vivian's talk. Vivian's talk about shame. I
Which
felt as
one?
though that
The
was
2018 or 20?
yes, whichever one was about shame and UX research.
That was Vivian in 2018.
Yes, I thought that was very eye opening to me because I it's something that has been brought to my attention before, the amount of like ego that kind of comes with doing research, and how a lot of times I think a lot of us beat ourselves up when we don't meet expectations or we don't live up to what is expected of us. That was a little bit redundant, sorry, but I thought, yeah, it was very good to unpack those feelings and really acknowledge them. And I think it's a great stepping stone for researchers to just open their minds, getting rid of that shame, getting rid of that shame, that those inhibitions, that sense of self doubt. I think it's very important for developing your research practice.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. It rewatching that talk for me because I was there in person in 2018, so it was nice
Wow,
nostalgia.
I'm jealous.
I remember like everyone who was in that room was kind of like, everyone had an epiphany at that moment in time. We're like, oh, right. Like we need to be thinking about ourselves too. And like we were doing all
Mhm.
these interviews all day, every day. We have to equally consider like, what's going on inside of us when, we have to be in a good spot to be able to relate to others and speak to others on a daily basis. So I think that was sort of like, the aha moment in everyone's mind in that room on that day. And it was
Yeah,
nice just like thinking back to, or just rewatching Vivian's talk to be reminded that you need to definitely think about yourself, maybe acknowledge the fact that you have these types of feelings, because sometimes it's hard to acknowledge it. Going back to Vivian's talk from 2019, where it was kind of like a follow up. So the year after when Vivian was at UXR Conf, her talk was on the siren call of self-neglect. And I remember one of the analogies she used was like, a lot of you in the room are frantically mopping instead of, pulling the plug and letting the water drain. So yeah, that I feel like was
cool.
another good reminder that, sometimes you need to take a step back instead of frantically mopping, figure out what the root cause of the problem is, and then deal with that instead of, trying to mop up all the water that's just overflowing.
That is eye opening. Oh my goodness.
It is a very long talk, but it is a very good talk. So if anyone is interested, it is up on our platform right now at Learners, joinlearners.com. And it's called The Siren Call of Self-Neglect by Vivian Castillo.
I'm a really big fan of our conference content. That might be a little bit shameless, but I really really do like it. I'm so happy that we have so much of it on the platform right now. It's
Mhm.
almost like Christmas.
Yeah. I do like watching back at conference content that was done in person because it just
Mhm.
reminds you of like, back in the day before COVID when you could actually go places and meet people face to face. It just feels a little different, learning there in the room with other people in the room with you feels a lot different actually than, I mean, learning virtually together, which is still nice. I find it is more convenient, but the in-person experience, like there's something you can't replicate about that. And I do miss it.
Hmm. I'm so sad. I've never been to an in-person UXR conf.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Well, maybe next year.
maybe next year.
Maybe
I've
next.
been to two UXR conf anywheres. And
Nice.
speaking of UXR conf anywhere, I to go back to Vivian's 2018 talk on shame, thinking about what you bring into a interview session, I think is very important.
Hmm.
Uh, just some self-reflection for me when I was doing research in the beginning of the pandemic to pivot from an in-person conference to EXR Conf anywhere. I feel as though I was probably bringing a lot of shame into it because I felt very guilty about the fact that I still had a job. I was interviewing a lot during this time too. I was having a lot of conversations with researchers who were either experiencing like their own personal layoff or job insecurity, or they were in an organization that was like ridiculously slashing uh, ridiculously slashing into the size of the research team.
Mhm.
I think about that a lot and how much emotion was in those research sessions and how emotionally taxing those were. Uh, take Vivian's work, Vivian's content is very, very useful for people who do research in emotionally charged topics.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of things end up becoming emotionally charged topics, especially in the last, how long has it been now? A year? It's been a year since we've been inside, right? I think especially now, like you run into a lot of conversations that just take that turn and become very uh, emotionally laborful. Is laborful a word? I like to make up words if you haven't realized already.
I think I understand what you're trying to get at, though.
Yeah. Okay. That wasn't a word. Okay. I know because you didn't say yes or no, so it's not a word. But you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we run into a lot of situations that require a lot of our emotional labor, especially as researchers during the tail end, hopefully the tail end of the global pandemic.
Hmm. Yeah. And I remember previously when I was working with at like fintech companies, a lot of the conversations there that might come up is like anything related to money can get into sensitive waters.
Can
Um,
imagine.
so yeah, it's tough to navigate the waters there in those types of conversations because I'm never, well, when I was doing it, I was never sure, like you never pry too deeply, and there's always the setup where you say like, if you aren't comfortable answering a question, you definitely don't have to, please let me know and we can skip, and like everyone is well aware of that. But once you get them to sort of like, once you relate with them and get them to loosen up and you create that connection, they're open to speaking about it. But then like after they're done speaking about it and you've like sort of processed all of this as the researcher, you're like, okay, now how do I respond?
Yeah.
It's like you haven't been in the same position, so you can't relate at that deep level, but you can kind of, maybe relate's not the right word here, but you understand like their point of view and where they're coming from. So like you want to be able to provide a well thought out, thoughtful, sensitive response. And yeah, I found that like anything related to like money is sometimes very, very hard to craft a thoughtful response to that, where you don't want to be offensive, where you don't want to be like, you don't want to like gloss over and be like, okay, thanks for your answer, let's move on to the next question or anything like that. Yeah, it's just my thoughts in relation to Vivian's talk.
Yeah, 100% agree with you on that. I think that says a lot. You could, if you work in fintech, you don't go into fintech expect to like have to do emotional labor on a regular basis for your job. You work in financial tech. You work for a company that handles money. You don't think that you're going to have to deal with a lot of feelings there, but really, I think it's a very emotionally charged niche to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Especially when you're like investigating pain points, because the pain points always come with like a lot of emotional baggage behind. Yeah. There was one other talk that that stood out to me because it was a good reminder of like the mindset we should have as researchers, which was Emma Craig's. This was also from UXRConf 2018. It's called Keep Calm and Proceed to Checkout. So Emma Craig is the lead product researcher at Shopify. And her talk was primarily, it was kind of like a case study around some of the research that she was doing on turning a very stressful checkout experience into something that's like calm and intuitive for buyers. So she had been thinking for a while on, why are we trying to make checkout experiences like super, snappy and fast when maybe it's good for the user or the customer or for the person going through the checkout process to like have the time to process, what they're actually doing. Is this something that they want to buy? Is this something that they maybe want to rethink about? And in her talk, she mentioned that when she was doing research with buyers who were going through this checkout process, not all of the people were going through that process to be like, here's what I want, and I'm going to get it right now at this moment in time. Some people were putting things into their, what do you call this? Shopping bag? Shopping cart. That's what it is. I don't purchase items online very often, you guys. People were putting items into their shopping cart for like shopping therapy. They weren't necessarily looking to buy any items. They were just like putting it in there because they were just having a good time looking through like a catalog. Other people were putting things in there, but then like they thought it was like super expensive, so they weren't gonna buy it. Other people were just checking things out. So it's like it was a lot more complex of a process than she had initially sort of thought of. And that's why her work around turning, maybe like there are times when you do want the user to slow down and like think about their actions instead of just letting them take the easiest route to the finish line. And I thought that was super interesting. And yeah, something that we should be thinking about in terms of like, you know, the actions we are allowing users to do on our products and whether or not it's a good thing for it to be like the easiest process.
That was very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's kind of related to, you know, social media and like how easy it is to get addicted to it. I remember Emma touched a bit on that as well. Like these products are built so that you are easily addicted to it. And is there a way for maybe the design to be modified so that the actions don't end up like this?
Yeah, it's almost a double-edged sword because I feel as though you want things to be easy, but you don't want them to be so easy that they lose meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like adding to cart, you want adding to cart to be a meaningful thing and lead to conversion, but it's become such an easy thing where my initial thought process was, yeah, when I add something to a cart, I don't actually want to buy it. It's usually just there as like a fake wish list for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other learnings from particular talks that stood out to you?
Not off the top of my head. I was watching Gnome's talk earlier today. I cannot remember 2018 or 2019. I think he only did one in between those 2 years. Am I correct?
It was 2019.
Yes.
And actually, now that you mention it, I also watched Gnome's talk, and I thought it was, you know, Gnome is hilarious, by the way. He's just a funny person, and it is always enjoyable to watch Gnome speak, in my humble opinion. So the title of Gnome's talk was called "Lessons Learned About Research and Design from My 4-Year-Old Daughter," and
heartwarming.
Very heartwarming. Also not super long. It's only 20 minutes, guys. And Gnome was just talking about like, why are we always looking to teach children things? Like, why don't we take a step back and actually learn from children who are actually quite brave and experimentative? Is that a word? Experimentative.
It's your job to tell me what the real word is, right?
Yeah, so children are brave. They just test things out. They like put a hose up straight to their face and like turn on the button and their face gets sprayed and they're fine with that. Just like testing things out and experimenting. So yeah, I thought this talk was also a good reminder that, you know, maybe we don't always need to be seeking things out and like in books and articles, things that are tried and true, although those are also amazing resources. But, you know, look at some everyday stuff. Look at your niece, your child, your cousin, these young folks who are just trying things out. Yeah.
It's funny because Gnome's talk reminded me a lot of Sam's talk, and that possibly has to do with the fact that I was rewatching Sam's talk earlier today, also to prep for this. Mm-hmm. But I feel as though that childlike wonderment is really just basic science. Yeah. You're just trying to understand like the basic fundamentals of the world around you. That curiosity is really the methodology that we should be taking and applying towards everything that we have that's mysterious or has unknowns to it. Mm-hmm. But I think that as we grow as human beings, as we enter into this thing called adulthood and we age, we get stuck in patterns and we feel as though we have enough basic principles down. We know not to touch the hot stove. So what good do we have from experimenting with touching the hot stove? But a child might look at a hot stove and think, okay, well, I touched the hot stove, it was hot, it burned me. Maybe if it's a little bit less hot, that there's an ideal amount towards where I can actually touch the stove. And I think that's just that level of curiosity. not saying that anybody should go purposely burn themselves, but I think that level of curiosity definitely has some value to it that we should always go back to and check on.
Yeah. And Noam was like, he mentioned that he was teaching the 5 whys framework to a set of people. And after, observing his daughter do a bunch of things, just experimenting, trying things out, he's like, okay, well, why is it 5 whys? Why isn't it like 6? Why isn't it 100? Just like, questions, like ask ourselves questions like why we do things a certain way. And I think it's always a good reminder to have that at the back of our minds as well. This also reminds me of Janelle's talk from last week, A Researcher's Mindset, which had a lot to do with that curiosity, like how a researcher thinks about things. Always asking the why, always being curious. Yeah,
it's very interesting. It's so interesting to me how generative research is this thing that researchers fight for. Like we fight for the right to do generative research and exploratory research like that. But realistically, it's the purest form of research. And it brings so much context in that really lets us do more evaluative research and lets people do like A/B tests that lets us do the A/B test that some people so desperately want to see. But it's really interesting to think about that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we should wrap up our weekly recap.
I agree.
Amazing talk.
That's a wrap.
Sam is not here right now, but both of us are extremely grateful to Sam for dropping by and chatting with us today. For next week, we've also got a lot of throwback talks. We're actually screening 18. It's a lot. It's a high number. 18 different talks next week. It's going to be the same throwback to UXRConf 2018, 2019. A lot of great content, and all of those talks will also be uploaded onto Learners as the week goes on. So even if you miss the screening, you won't be missing out. But the screening is there for you to drop in if you'd like to sort of like set aside that time to watch that talk. We've also got Learners Club coming up next week at 8 p.m. on June 3rd. That's the Thursday. So sign up form link for that will be linked in our Monday email next week. But yeah, a lot of stuff coming up next week as well. Hope to see you guys all. Yeah, very exciting. Awesome. Well, thanks for everyone tuning in. Kyle, do you want to turn on our outro music?
Okay, that's a wrap. It's been great.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. See you again next